I used to think that when you die, everything ends. But someone on the other side was waiting for me to remember a promise I had forgotten. I once believed time was a straight line. You're born, you grow up, you learn, you fall in love, you make mistakes, and then you die. That's it. Linear, cold, and irreversible. But everything I believed shattered in less than 3 seconds. One explosion. A plume of smoke. A flash of light that sliced my consciousness in half. And then silence. My name is Avery Monroe. I'm an archaeologist. A rational human being who lives by maps, artifacts, and layers of ancient earth. I worked with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, surveying soil before reconstruction projects in war zones. I wasn't a soldier, but I'd seen bombs detonate close enough to sear human flesh. I wasn't seeking war, but I wasn't afraid of it either. I believed that if we understood the past deeply enough, we could avoid repeating its tragedies. I was wrong. That afternoon, our Humvee was heading back to base near Mosul. I remember jotting down notes on a freshly excavated soil sample, an ancient stratum estimated to be over 7,000 years old, possibly evidence of a pre-Sumerian civilization. And then everything turned white. Not black and white. A silent, invisible, infinite white. And just like that, I was no longer in the vehicle. The question wasn't, what happened to me? The real question was, how am I still thinking when my body is lying in that wreckage? I didn't know I had died, but I knew, without a doubt, that I had just left everything I once called familiar. What I first saw wasn't a body. It was my consciousness watching itself. Have you ever seen yourself without a mirror? Have you ever felt yourself to be wider than your skin, deeper than your memories? I have, and that was only the beginning. If you've ever thought death is the end, wait until you see the beings of light waiting for you the moment your soul slips out of time. I didn't fall. I didn't float. I didn't go anywhere at all. I opened, like a doorway within the invisible, as if my awareness had been unhooked from bone and expanded so vastly that it no longer had edges. No more heartbeat, no more wind, no form, yet somehow there was still life. A radiant life, but not blinding. Gentle, like a memory you've never consciously recalled, but have always somehow known. Before me were thousands of beings made of light. No faces. Yet each one carried information not in words, but in pure knowing, transmitted directly into my awareness like a soft electric current. No one needed introductions. I knew exactly who they were. And more surprisingly, they knew me. No one judged me. No one asked what I had done wrong. Instead, they created a space for me to return the data of my soul. Every memory, every emotion, every vibration I had carried through my lifetime was uploaded into a greater field of energy, like streams of light radiating outward. And I understood, each of us is a messenger, a collector of human experiences sent to bring them home. I used to think the soul was something religious. But here, I no longer believed in a soul. I knew I was one. I was learning how to live inside a body. And now, for a moment, I had stepped out of that body and returned to myself. I asked not with words, but with a wave of intention. Why am I here? Why now? And I wasn't answered. I remembered it. I remembered it as part of a truth that had always been there, waiting for me to recall. You came to learn, and to bring what you learned back for the souls who are still asleep. But that was only the first space. They called it the Protocol of Light, a realm where you reconnect with the parts of your memory you had forgotten, where you upload your understanding of humanity, culture, pain, and love into the stream of universal consciousness. I didn't know where I would go next, but part of me knew this. Each layer of light from here on wouldn't just be about understanding, it would be about choosing. And that choice would forever change how I saw life itself. I used to think consciousness was something that lived inside the brain. But now I was conscious. No form, no boundary, no self, and yet I was everywhere. I can't describe that feeling with human words, but if I had to try, it was like dissolving into absolute love. Among thousands of beings of light, I didn't feel small. I felt deeply known. To the roots. As if every moment of rage, every flicker of weakness, every misstep I had ever made was seen and still accepted. No pity, no praise, just pure presence. And I broke open. I released a question not in words, but as a ripple from my heart into the infinite. Who am I? And I wasn't answered. I became the answer. I remembered I had once been light. I remembered I had volunteered to descend to earth, where time folds into lines, where pain touches skin, where forgetting is part of the design. I remembered the soul contracts I had made with those I would love, hurt, betray, and forgive. I wasn't a human with a soul. I was a soul, choosing to experience humanity. And in that moment, I cried not with tears, but with vibration. A cry without sound, woven through my being like a melody of truth. And in that space, I looked back at Earth from afar, a glowing blue dot spinning in the galaxy. Small, but sacred. And I knew it wasn't a place I was cast down to. It was a place I willingly fell into to remember who I truly was. But the moment I realized I was a soul was also the moment I had to face a question no one else could answer for me. What kind of pain would I carry back? And for what purpose? I thought my journey was over. But it wasn't. The universe doesn't take you home just because you finally remembered who you are. Instead, it places you before a far more difficult question. Now that you know, what will you choose? I wasn't floating. I wasn't being pulled. But a new space began unfolding around me like the fabric of time peeling back, layer by layer, revealing a plane of reality where all possibilities existed side by side, waiting to be chosen. I saw myself. Not one, but many versions. There was an Avery who wasn't hurt at all. An Avery who lost both legs. An Avery who was paralyzed. And one who never returned. Each version was a path. Each wound, a lesson. And the beings of light stood quietly around me, not guiding, not pushing, just waiting for me to remember why I came in the first place. Then, like a wave crashing through my soul, I understood. Wounds are not punishments. They are tools. Every crack in the body is a doorway for the light to pour through if you allow it. I hesitated. I wanted to go back. I had work left unfinished. A family. Journal pages yet to be written. But I didn't want the pain. I wanted to wake up untouched. No broken bones, no brain trauma, no nightmares. And then one being came closer. Not by form, but by presence. It didn't speak, but I understood instantly. If you return whole, you will continue as before. But if you carry a wound, you will remember this. And through it, you will help others remember. I saw those who would come to me one day. A boy who had lost faith after his mother's death. A woman who had attempted suicide 3 times. A soldier back from war with hollow eyes. They would find me, not because I was special, but because I carried the same wounds they did. And from that place, I could say the words they hadn't dared to speak aloud. Pain is not failure. It is an invitation. And so I agreed. Not through words, but by choosing my body again, with all the wounds I had now consciously accepted. I chose an injured eye. I chose a part of my brain to be concussed. I chose the nerve pain that would linger for months. And I didn't choose them because I wanted to suffer. I chose them because I wanted to remember. I used to think I was strong. I had stood in crumbling archaeological sites in Syria, had a gun pressed to my temple near the Iranian border, uncovered human remains beneath 5,000-year-old ruins, and I hadn't flinched. But there, standing among the versions of myself, I trembled. Because it wasn't someone else asking me to choose pain. It was I waiting for me to choose rightly. I began seeing each moment of my life when I had hidden my feelings, when I had put on strength like armor, when I buried myself in work to avoid the unnamed loneliness that visited me each night. And I realized if I didn't choose the wound that would crack that shell open, I would remain asleep in this form for the rest of my life. One being of light brought me closer to a memory that had never happened. I saw myself waking up in a hospital bed, completely unharmed, with no memory of this experience. I returned to work, lived safely, carried on. But my eyes were hollow. I had survived, but I had never truly lived. Then I looked again, and saw another version of me, bones broken, nervous system disrupted, but in those eyes was something I had never seen before, the fire of truth, a quiet, radiant beauty from within. And I wept not out of fear, but because I finally understood, if I wanted to touch my soul, I had to let my body lead the way. I didn't choose pain. I chose awareness. I didn't choose tragedy. I chose truth. I didn't choose suffering. I chose awakening. And the moment I accepted, everything fell silent, as if the entire space bowed before a soul who had just remembered who she was. I was no longer just a woman who'd survived an accident. I was light, choosing to return to the darkness, so others might remember they had never truly been lost. Have you ever considered this? What if the most painful parts of your life were the ones you chose, long before this lifetime, just to help you grow deeper, love harder, and live more honestly? I opened my eyes not because I wanted to, but because my soul had already chosen to return. My body felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Something was wrapped around my head, a breathing tube ran through my nose, and 4 lines snaked down my arm. The sharp scent of antiseptic, the beeping machines, the sterile white light. But the first thing I noticed wasn't the pain. It was the absence. I was no longer me. Or rather, I was still me, but not the me I used to be. The old Avery, the sharp-minded archaeologist, the skeptic, the woman who lived by ancient maps and carbon data, she didn't come back with me. What remained was something quieter, deeper, something that looked at the world as if living for the very first time. The nurse told me I'd been unconscious for nearly 17 hours after the explosion. A severe concussion. Major trauma to my left eye. Nerve damage is spreading to my neck and arm. They said I was lucky. But they didn't know this wasn't luck. This was designed. When I saw my face in the mirror, swollen, bruised, with fresh stitches running across my forehead, I didn't see something grotesque. I saw a gateway. Each scar was a seal, a living signature of the choice I had made to come back. Not to survive, but to bear witness to a deeper truth, that we are not these bodies, but these bodies are the torches our souls borrow to light the darkness. People asked me if I saw anything while I was in the coma. I stayed silent, because how could I describe light to someone who's never seen it? How could I explain a realm where memory isn't the past, but a living truth unfolding in real time? So I began to write, not to tell a story, but to encode the layers of light memory into human language. I didn't speak of religion. I didn't preach. I simply wrote what I had seen and hoped that maybe, just maybe, someone out there, someone on the verge of breaking under the weight of pain, might realize that perhaps, just perhaps, they once chose that pain, so they could rise stronger than ever before. But there was one thing I hadn't yet understood. How do you bring that kind of light into a world where most people are still asleep? My body had returned, but part of me was still standing there in that realm of light, watching myself struggle inside a reality far too narrow for a consciousness that had just been expanded. You can't go back to being who you were once you know you're a soul. You can't pretend to care about emails, news cycles, or deadlines after you've seen Earth as a single point of light in an infinite field of awareness. You can't breathe the same way when your chest is holding the entire universe. I began to fall into a silence that others called post-traumatic depression. But no one realized I wasn't depressed. I just couldn't shrink myself anymore. Every shallow conversation left me gasping for air. Every visitor who smiled and said, "Hang in there," felt like a stranger. I could see concern in their eyes, but no one dared ask where I had been. I tried to tell a close friend that I had seen light, that I had met beings, that I had remembered something true about the soul. She paused, then said, "Maybe it was just a hallucination. You know, trauma does that to the brain." I nodded, but inside, something quietly closed. No one believed me, and I understood. How can you believe in something you've never touched? But that's exactly why I came back to bear witness to the invisible through the undeniable presence of who I now was. I started writing. At first, just in a journal. Then in notes, fragments of memory, pages of letters addressed to the version of me who once doubted, who once believed only in what could be measured. I wasn't writing to remember. I was writing to pass on the things I could no longer carry alone. Every night, before I closed my eyes, I felt someone watching me from the other side of the light. Not to judge, but to remind me, "You made a promise. Don't forget." I don't remember exactly what I promised. But deep down, I know this much: life after death is not the end. It's the beginning of a mission to live with eyes that have seen the light. Have you ever felt completely out of place in a world you once called home? That's the moment your soul has awakened, while the world is still asleep. And your task now is to illuminate every shadow you once walked through. I began my journey back into the world, not as an archaeologist, but as someone sent to unearth the sacred memories still asleep inside others. I didn't preach. I didn't try to convince anyone that I had died and seen the light. I just told my story, from the heart, with the tremble of a voice that had once stood at the edge of life and death. And something strange began to happen. Those who used to scoff fell quiet. The skeptics began to cry. People who believed they had nothing left to trust started asking, "If I am a soul, where do I begin?" I began visiting hospitals. I sat with patients facing brain surgery. I spoke with veterans struggling with PTSD. I listened to mothers who had lost children and couldn't take a full breath without pain. I didn't bring blind hope. I brought back the soul's memory. They had forgotten that no pain is ever meaningless. That every loss, every collapse, every moment we think we can't survive has already been agreed upon by our souls, to learn, to awaken, and to remember that we are stronger than the pain. I wrote books. Each page became a shard of light. Not because I wanted to be an author, but because light that isn't shared begins to dim. I started hosting small gatherings. No promotion, no spotlight, just people showing up with unspoken questions held tight in their chests. And when they left, I saw it in their eyes that shimmered, like they had just glimpsed something deeply familiar, something they had lost for far too long. And then, during one of my talks, a boy around 15 raised his hand and asked, "Miss Avery, how do you know if you're living in alignment with your soul's purpose?" I didn't answer right away. I looked into his eyes, and for a moment, I saw myself at 15. The skeptical girl, logical, detached. Then I smiled gently and said, "When you start living not to prove anything, but to bring light to someone whose flame is about to go out, that's when you're living in alignment." I'm no longer afraid of death, no longer afraid of loss. The only fear I carry now is letting the light I brought back fade into silence. Because I know I once made a promise. I used to think that to change the world, you needed grand speeches, impressive degrees, and bright stages. But after death, I learned something else. There is a kind of change that comes quietly, that doesn't need to be spoken or proven. It just needs to be present, present with a soul that is truly waking up. I started spending time in silent gatherings. People would come, sit down, simply breathe, and listen to themselves. In that stillness, tears would fall without explanation. Hands would reach for each other, trembling. And some, after years of isolation, would feel truly seen, not by someone's eyes, but by another person's soul. One day, a middle-aged man came to see me. He had just lost his wife. He didn't speak, didn't ask questions. We sat together for over 20 minutes in silence. When he finally stood up, he said only one thing. "You didn't need to say anything. I heard enough. Thank you for the silence." I realized something simple but profound. Light does not need to be explained. It only needs to be passed on. And any soul that is still enough will know exactly what to do with it. I kept writing. But this time, not for readers. For souls on the verge of awakening. Those who don't yet know they're about to die to the old version of themselves and be born again into truth. I wrote for the ones who had collapsed in despair. For those who had let go of all belief. And for the children with ancient eyes, whose small faces carried the gaze of beings who had just returned from the realm of light I once saw. Then the letters started coming. Hundreds, then thousands. Some wrote that they had planned to end their life until they watched a short video of me telling my story. Others were living behind bars, but said that for the first time, they had forgiven themselves because of that story. Even people who never believed in the soul wrote to say their hearts trembled at something reason couldn't explain. I take no credit. I am simply a messenger, a bridge between the light and this world. And I know that each time I tell the story, I am relighting a small flame in someone's soul memory, so that when they fall, that light will whisper to them, "Don't be afraid. You made a promise, and now is the time to remember." Not everyone needs a near-death experience to awaken. Sometimes, just hearing a story your soul knows is true is enough to begin living differently. That's what Avery did not to impress, but to help you remember your path. If you've ever faced a crisis, fallen so hard you thought you'd never rise again, or lost something no words can describe, maybe it wasn't punishment. Maybe it was a call to return. Your soul is not broken. It's just trying to remember the promise it once made and forgot.